Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
Imagine a world in chaos, a world where great empires crumble, where legions of soldiers once thought invincible retreat in disarray, where distant lands whisper with the footsteps of strangers moving ever closer. This was the migration period, a time of great upheaval and transformation, a time that saw the birth of medieval Europe from the ruins of the Roman Empire. The old order was not merely challenged, it was irrevocably altered. Kingdoms rose where provinces once stood, new peoples arrived, bringing their own cultures and traditions, and the very fabric of European civilization was rewoven in the crucible of movement, war, and adaptation. The migration period, spanning roughly from the late 4th century to the early 8th century, was a defining moment in European history. It was a time when Germanic tribes, Huns, Slavs, Avars, and other peoples moved across the continent, shaping the political and cultural landscapes of what would eventually become modern Europe. While often depicted as an age of darkness and destruction, it was also an era of creation and transformation, a bridge between the ancient and medieval worlds. Rome, once the uncontested master of Europe, found itself under siege from forces both within and beyond its borders. And yet, from the ashes of empire, new kingdoms emerged, each carrying the legacy of the past into an uncertain future. What drove these migrations? Who were these peoples that carved their destinies upon a map of history? And how did their movements reshape the foundations of Europe? These are the questions that we must explore as we journey through the migration period, a time of great struggles, great leaders, and the forging of a new world order. To understand the migration period, one must first understand the conditions that allowed it to unfold. Rome, the eternal city, had dominated the known world for centuries, its legions enforcing peace across a vast territory stretching from Britain to the Middle East. Yet by the 4th century, cracks had begun to appear in its mighty edifice. Political instability, economic troubles, and the pressure of defending an overstretched empire had weakened Rome's grip on its frontiers. Along those borders, restless peoples watched, waiting for the right moment to move. One of the earliest and most consequential migrations was that of the Goths. Pressured by the arrival of the Huns from the east, the Gothic tribes sought refuge within the borders of the Roman Empire. In 376, they were granted permission to settle in Roman territory, but mistreatment by Roman officials led to one of the most decisive battles of the era, the Battle of Adrianople in 378. Here the Goths, led by their king Fritigern, dealt the Roman army a catastrophic defeat, killing Emperor Valens in the process. This battle marked a turning point, demonstrating that Rome could no longer rely on its military supremacy to control the movements of migrating peoples. The Visigoths would not remain within the empire as mere refugees. Under Alaric, they would march on Rome itself, sacking the city in 410. This shocking event signaled to the world that the empire was vulnerable, and it emboldened other groups to carve out their own territories within its borders. The Vandals, originally from Central Europe, moved through Gaul and Spain before establishing a powerful kingdom in North Africa, from which they would later sack Rome in 455. Meanwhile, the Burgundians, Suebi, and Franks each claimed lands for themselves, setting the stage for the emergence of new political entities. If the Goths had been a major challenge for Rome, the arrival of the Huns would be nothing short of a cataclysm. The Huns, a nomadic people from the steppes of Central Asia, swept into Europe with terrifying speed and efficiency. They were master horsemen, their composite bows allowing them to unleash devastating attacks before disappearing into the horizon. Their leader, Attila, was a figure of both fear and legend. Known as the Scourge of God, Attila led his forces deep into the heart of Europe, ravaging cities and compelling even the most powerful rulers to pay tribute. In 451, Attila's forces clashed with a coalition of Romans and Visigoths at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains. The battle ended in a costly stalemate, halting the Hunnic advance into Gaul. A year later, Attila turned his sights on Italy, devastating the countryside but ultimately failing to take Rome. His sudden death in 453 marked the beginning of the end for the Hunnic Empire. Without his unifying leadership, the Huns fragmented, and many of their former subjects, including the Gepids and Ostrogoths, moved to fill the power vacuum. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476, when the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer, is often seen as the symbolic end of antiquity. Yet, this was not the end of Rome's influence. The Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantium, would continue to thrive, and the legacy of Rome would live on in the emerging European kingdoms, many of which sought to claim its mantle. With Rome's authority crumbling, the peoples who had migrated across its borders now sought to establish their own dominions. The Visigoths, having once been Rome's adversaries, settled in Spain, where they founded a kingdom that would last until the Muslim conquest in 711. The Franks, under their leader Clovis, established a powerful kingdom in Gaul, laying the groundwork for what would become France. The Ostrogoths, under Theodoric the Great, seized control of Italy, ruling it with a blend of Roman and Germanic traditions. Even as these new kingdoms formed, the migrations continued. The Slavs, moving from their homelands in Eastern Europe, spread into the Balkans and Central Europe, establishing the roots of many modern nations. The Avars, a powerful steppe people, dominated much of Central Europe for centuries before being absorbed into the surrounding societies. Meanwhile, the Anglo-Saxons arrived in Britain, displacing the remnants of Roman rule and forming the early English kingdoms. Though often depicted as a time of destruction, the migration period was also a time of fusion. Roman laws and institutions did not vanish overnight. Instead, they were adapted by the new rulers. Latin remained the dominant language of administration and scholarship. Christianity, which had taken root in the empire, spread further through missionary work, influencing the cultural and political structures of the emerging European kingdoms. The migration period was not merely an age of war and turmoil. It was the crucible in which the nations of medieval and modern Europe were forged. The fall of Rome did not mean the end of civilization, but rather the beginning of something new, a Europe shaped by the movement of peoples, the blending of traditions, and the rise of new political entities. The echoes of this era can still be heard today, in the languages we speak, the borders that define our nations, and the cultural legacies that continue to shape our world. Europe as we know it was born not in the palaces of emperors, but in the struggles and aspirations of migrating people seeking new homes and new destinies.